Good morning. Welcome. We're happy to have you joining us on this webinar this morning. And we are going to be listening to a webinar, going to be listening to speakers tell us about export opportunities for kidney beans to Europe. We're really happy that you could join us. And as I look at the list of attendees, I see that we still have a lot of people coming in. So we're going to kick off with a very quick introduction and some housekeeping before we turn to our experts and learn more about kidney beans and their opportunities in Europe. My name is Tonia Dabwe. I am your host and moderator for today's session, and I'm the founder and CEO of an online consultancy that works with companies in developing countries to boost their profitability and growth. As I said, we are going to be looking at kidney beans today, and for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we are using a webinar program called GoToWebinar. And I'm just going to show you a couple of house rules that are important to take note of as we move through this webinar. The most important thing to know is that we cannot hear you and we cannot see you, and you also cannot hear or see each other. So if you want to communicate with us, please use the questions tab to send a message or to ask a question. For example, if you're having technical difficulties, audio problems, or if you get kicked out of the webinar, there are a couple of things that you can do. First of all, if you do have audio problems, the easiest thing to do is to try to log in again using the link that you received in the invitation email. In case that doesn't work, you can also try switching your audio settings in the GoToWebinar menu. Try switching them between computer and headset if you have that, and switching it back to see if that makes a difference. You can also call into the webinar in case you really cannot make it on your laptop or phone. You can also call into the webinar using the phone number that was shared with you in the email. And don't worry, it is a local number, so you're making a local call, not an international call, in case you choose to do that. However, if none of those options work and you still cannot actually log into the webinar, again, don't worry, we are recording this entire webinar and you are going to receive a link to the recording at the end of this session. You will also receive a link to the presentations. I believe the presentations are going to be attached to the email that you're going to be receiving. You receive the presentations that we're showing today, so everything the speakers are going to say is going to be shared in the presentation, and you're also going to receive a link to the study that this webinar is based on. So basically, sit back, listen, and relax. So as I already mentioned, if you have any questions, please use the questions tab to ask your question. We have two Q&A sessions during this webinar, a very short one about midway through the webinar and a longer Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if we don't get to your question in the first Q&A session, don't worry, we're going to pick it up in the second Q&A session. We may not be able to answer all your questions, but we will do our best to answer as many as possible. We are also going to run a very quick poll. I see that on the screen. I still have that we're going to run a few polls. Given the information that is going to be shared by our speakers today, we've decided to just limit that to one poll. So I am going to call up that poll in a second so that we can just test if all of our settings are working correctly. For us, it's also a way to get to know you a little bit, and we would really like to know, are you already exporting to Europe? Please enter your answers. Okay, about 2/3 of those that are present today have voted so far. I'm going to leave the poll open for just a few more seconds to give those of you that haven't had the opportunity to vote yet to vote. Last chance. Closing it down in 5, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you for voting. And as you can see on the screen, we have a lot of attendees with us today who have never before or who are not yet exporting to Europe. And I think this is very interesting information for our speakers today to know what exactly to focus on in terms of the information that we're going to be sharing with you. That was one slide too early. Apologies. As I said, this is a webinar about kidney beans, so we're going to be sharing a lot of information with you about kidney beans in terms of what is the market potential for kidney beans in Europe, what are the latest consumer and buyer trends. We're going to pay particular attention to the legal requirements that you need to meet, for example, in terms of food safety, if you want to export to Europe. And we're also going to share how the market is developing in the most important export markets. And we're going to tell you where the biggest opportunities for kidney beans are located. We're also going to be hearing directly from a buyer who is importing kidney beans along with a lot of other grains and pulses from various countries in the world. And he is going to be sharing his experiences and giving you some advice if you are interested in exporting kidney beans to Europe. And I happen to know that he also has an invitation for you, so stay tuned. So throughout the presentation, throughout the entire webinar, we're going to be sharing advice, practical information, tips, suggestions that hopefully are going to benefit you in terms of exporting to Europe. Please feel free again to ask your questions at any time in the chat. And at this moment, I would very much like to invite Ms. Sanne Bogers, the Program Manager for Kidney Beans from CBI, sorry, that is not the Program Manager for kidney beans, but Ms. Sanne Bogers from CBI to join us on the screen and welcome our participants. Sanne, you are not the Program Manager. My apologies.
No problem, Tonia. Thank you very much for the introduction anyway, and hello to everyone. I want to give a very warm welcome to all participants worldwide. To those of you who are already exporting to Europe, but also to the majority, as we just saw, who are not yet exporting. Also, a warm welcome to all others, including business support organizations, people from sector associations, and our importers. So my name is Sanne Bogers. I'm a Program Manager Market Intelligence at CBI. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with CBI, I would like to quickly introduce our organization. So CBI stands for the Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries. We are a Dutch government organization and mainly funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. CBI aims to contribute to the transition to sustainable and inclusive economies through support of export to Europe and regional markets. We support entrepreneurs from developing countries to become successful in exports. And we do this by helping finding solutions to the bottlenecks in the export value chain. And one of such bottlenecks that we see coming up in the research is often a lack of good market information. So CBI offers market information, or market intelligence, as we prefer to call it, on the European market for 14 different sectors. And this ranges from the sector that we are talking about today, grains, pulses, and oilseeds, to other agricultural sectors or to tourism and apparel. And our market intelligence is specifically aimed at exporters from developing countries. And it contains a lot of practical tips, and it is free, and so especially focused on products from developing countries. And today we are here to present some of the key insights from our research about the European market for kidney beans. And we hope this webinar will give you new information, ideas, and inspiration, and that it helps to prepare your business for your next export success. I wish you all a very good session, and back to you, Tonia.
Thank you, Sanne. And I'm leaving my webcam on just for a second because I had some technical issues earlier this morning. I'm going to switch it off when our speakers come online to present their presentations. At this moment, I would like to start introducing our speakers. And first up is Michel. Michel Peperkamp is the director of ICI Business. And Michel is a market research expert who is joining us from Voorburg in the Netherlands. Hi, Michel. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, good morning, Tonia. Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Michel Peperkamp, like Tonia said. I've been working in the food ingredients, including pulses, for the last 10 years as an independent consultant. So I support companies from different countries to conduct their business in Europe. but I also provide a lot of market intelligence. And this is why I've been working with together with CBI. So I'm responsible for the market intelligence on grains, pulses, and oilseeds. So that's me.
So basically, Michel is your go-to guy for any and all technical information when it comes to kidney beans. Thank you for that introduction, Michel. Erik, may I invite you to join us on the screen? And for our public, our second speaker today is Mr. Erik Hagen. He is the Executive Director of AGT Foods Europe, and he is joining us from Waalwijk in the Netherlands. AGT Foods supplies pulses and grains to food producers in Europe and around the world. Erik has been working in the agricultural products trade for more than 30 years. Welcome, Erik. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tonia. Everybody, welcome to this webinar. And I'm pleased that CBI invited me to be a speaker on this webinar as well. My name is Erik Hagen, as you said, Executive Director of AGT Foods Europe. I've been primarily in the pulses business since 1989, not solely pulses. I've been in rice and other agricultural commodity business, with a strong focus of our business being developing countries, niche markets, and developing products which are, let's say, in competition with the main pulses sources where a lot of countries or a lot of buyers in Europe are buying their beans from. As such, I hope to have a good contribution to this webinar, and I would like to share my experience over the last more than 30 years with the audience and hope to give them some guidance.
And definitely, I think what you're saying about niche markets and your presentation about niche markets and the opportunities that exist, especially for small exporters, is going to be very valuable. Thank you, Erik. We'll be joining you in about 15 to 20 minutes, I believe.
No problem. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, then now is the time to start listening to our first speaker, Mr. Michel Peperkamp, as he takes us through his presentation about market opportunities in Europe, as well as trends in Europe for kidney beans. Michel, over to you.
Thank you, Tonia. Let me check if I can. Yeah, my screen is there, I think.
Your screen is there, but we cannot see you.
Let me put on the camera as well so you can see me.
There you are.
There we are. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I can kick off the webinar with the first presentation. So let me basically, let's see. So the key questions for today. Today I will tell you something about kidney beans in Europe. I will do this by answering a few key questions, such as what trends drive the consumption, which countries offer opportunities for kidney beans, what buyers in Europe are looking for, and how you can position your company. Let's start with a quick overview. First, defining kidney beans as a product, because kidney beans is one of the main common beans, and common beans in official terms is Phaseolus vulgaris. Common beans are a diverse group and not only include kidney beans, but also other bean varieties. So well-known common beans in Europe include, for example, dark kidney beans, dark red kidney beans, navy beans, but you will also see black beans, white kidney beans available on the European market. And other beans also include traditional varieties like local varieties such as Barlozzi beans in Italy, Caparones in Spain, Flageolets in France. So it's a big group. All these common beans are included in the statistics in this presentation, but you can assume that kidney beans are the main category. So common beans as a whole group, they form the largest part in the European import of dry beans. And in 2020, Europe imported 473 million euros of common beans. This is around 85% of the total dry bean import. And remember, this group is quite diverse. So the rest of the imports consisted of mung beans, cowpeas, Atsuki beans, and some other bean families. But yeah, common beans are the biggest group of all. A bit more about consumption. So kidney beans, the market for kidney beans or common beans is gradually growing. There was also an upward trend in 2020. Most of the beans are imported as dry beans, while today's consumption mainly consists of pre-cooked or canned beans. So most kidney beans in Europe are imported. Europe depends on the foreign supply. So when there's higher demand, the import will also increase. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered a stronger demand for shelf-stable foods, healthy ingredients, and this led to an extra import growth in 2020 of 9%. And also the prices were quite a bit higher than average. However, Europe is not a major market when it comes to consumption. Compared to the rest of the world, the bean consumption in Europe is relatively underdeveloped. So the European consumption per capita is actually less than a kilo. As a comparison, in the United States, people consume somewhere between 2.9 and 4.4 kilos per capita. And in the largest consuming countries, such as Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, beans are part of a daily diet, actually. So the question is, does Europe have room for growth? And I think to answer that question, we really have to look at the trends and developments that could play a positive role in stimulating the consumption of kidney beans. So there are several trends that can drive the demand for kidney beans. First of all, China. China will play a smaller role in the supply. People in China move away from the countryside, so that leads to less production and a decreasing export. European buyers also see prices increase, and for Chinese farmers, it's much easier to sell in the local market, where demand is high and food safety control is less demanding than in Europe. So there is room for other countries to fill in this European demand with a reliable supply, at least for those that can meet the high standards that are required in Europe. At the same time, we can expect the popularity of beans and other pulses to increase under the new European policies. For example, the European Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, they're all focused on a protein transition. So meat consumption must make way for plant protein. And Europe wants to make agriculture more sustainable through the production of pulses, and in particular organic production. So you can expect more production, but at the same time you can expect also the demand for beans and other protein-rich products to increase. A number of European consumers are raising their awareness for a healthier diet and sustainable food. Kidney beans may be seen as an old-fashioned food, but they are nutritious. So that's basically what counts for health-oriented consumers. Consumers also relate healthy eating to local and organic food. So that will result in an extra push for locally produced and organic beans. But you have to remember as a supplier that it is not likely that farmers in Europe will be able to fulfill the entire demand. So yeah, you can expect still part to be coming from foreign suppliers. Well, today's market, I think most kidney beans are, or most consumption is dominated by traditional consumption. Many countries in Europe have their own typical dishes with beans, such as bean stew or bean soup. But the influences of foreign cuisines definitely have influenced consumption too. Just to give an example, Mexican chili con carne, tortilla wraps with beans. They have become quite popular as foods in Europe. As the population in Europe gets more diverse, you can expect new ethnic influences that will contribute to kidney bean consumption. And in the end, European consumers, they value good food, but also convenience plays a really important role in purchasing decisions. And for that reason, most kidney beans are actually pre-cooked and canned. And to make these convenience products a bit more attractive, you can see food brands develop new products and product packaging. For example, kidney beans are used in ready-made meals, in salads, as a protein ingredient in vegan products, such as meat substitutes, and also pre-cooked beans and packaged in standing pouches instead of cans, like you can see on the picture. So these developments should take away a little bit of the old-fashioned reputation of beans and make them a bit more attractive for the common consumer. Going directly to the countries, which countries provide potential opportunities? I'm going to discuss a couple of them. Italy is it's a traditional consumption country for mainly white kidney beans and cranberry beans, also known as cannellini and ballotti. But overall, the consumption of beans in Italy is somewhat decreasing. Plus, there's a transition, of course, also from dry bean retail sales to the consumption of canned beans, like more convenience. But Italy will definitely remain to play a crucial role in the processing and distribution of beans in Europe. So Italy is really a leading country with leading companies such as La Doria Group, Pedon. They make Italy into the largest importer actually of kidney beans in Europe. In 2020, the country imported 120,000 tons from non-European suppliers with a value of 128 million euros. And these imports are actually still increasing despite of the decreasing consumption or stable consumption. So next country, the second largest market in Europe, which is the UK. They imported 94,000 tons in 2020. The UK has a very stable consumption, but is a strong consumer of baked beans, otherwise known as navy beans and tomato sauce. Baked beans are part of a typical British breakfast, so they make out about 77% of the canned beans purchases in Britain. There are also opportunities in ethnic consumption and product development. So on one side you see a large multicultural population that consume beans, but on the other side there are also consumers that are looking for more nutritious, easy to prepare products. So there are companies such as Kraft Heinz that respond to this with individual product sizes or microwavable beans, as shown in the image here on the slide. And the UK is one of the leading countries in convenience and product development. So that's important to note. Next country I would like to discuss is Spain. Spain has a traditional consumption of beans with various types of bean stews. This is reflected in the production of typical Spanish bean varieties. So the domestic production is actually between 15 and 20,000 tons per year, more or less. But for the most part, the country remains dependent on imported beans. So for the import, Spain has strong relations with Latin America, Argentina being by far the largest supplier to Spain. And just like in Italy, there's a transition going on from dry beans to canned beans, at least in consumption. These sales were more or less 50-50 in 2016, 2017, but nowadays canned bean purchases are slightly higher than the dry bean. In France, well, in France you have an active government that actually actively promotes protein crops. There's an ambition to expand the cultivation, but there will also be incentives to promote pulses with consumers. And you can see, for example, the Nutri-Score label that will tell consumers the nutritious value and healthiness of a food product. So on the product here, you can see a Nutri-Score of A. This helps the consumer to make healthier choices and select beans as a nutritious food. So that could be of influence. In general, there's a strong preference for locally produced products, as well as growing interest in organic food. France actually experienced the highest growth in organic food in 2019, making it the second largest market for organic food in Europe. However, despite the preference of local beans, the import of from non-European countries remains still quite strong, and is about 30,000 tons. At least that's what it was in 2020. Another interesting company to mention, I would say Portugal, because Portugal is perhaps the country with the highest consumption per capita of beans in Europe. And an interesting point to mention also is that Portugal has the highest import volume from Ethiopia. And at the same time, the average dry bean price is actually a bit lower than in the rest of Europe. So there may be a connection there as well. In volume, well, Portugal imports about 30 to 40,000 tons of beans on an annual basis. A bit more, this is maybe a big table to grasp in once, but just to go for it a bit quickly, all opportunities can be found in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, especially Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. They have experienced quite a big growth in the past 5 years. So in Romania, Bulgaria, Egypt is one of the main suppliers. Probably due to the attractive pricing of Egypt. If you look at the supply to Germany, Hungary, and Poland, then you see the USA and China that play a more significant role. Remember that the slides will be shared, so you can always look back. Trade hubs, you can use trade hubs to get your beans distributed throughout Europe. Besides the UK and Portugal, major re-exporters of dry beans can be found in Belgium and the Netherlands. These countries have relatively a high export value, and they can also be interesting for more niche bean varieties. So that's for me part one. I think it's back to Tonia to see if there are already some questions.
No, not right now, because given the time that we have just spent, I would really like to move forward with our second presentation and take questions during our Q&A session. So thank you very much, Michel, for your presentation. Very interesting. And for our audience, as Michel said, the slides are going to be shared with you. So don't worry if you missed part of the information or didn't have the chance to read everything. The detailed information is going to come to you on the slides. And at this point, thank you very much, Michel. And at this point, I would like to invite Mr. Erik Hagen to join us on the screen. And Erik, you have a very interesting presentation for us, and I am looking forward to hearing about that.
Well, thank you very much. I'll do my best to make it interesting indeed. Let me just share the screen with you. I've built it up in two parts: a quick introduction on AGT Foods as company, and thereafter some information where potential exporters should reckon with when they want to export to the European market. AGT Foods Europe, that's where I'm based in the Netherlands, is part of AGT Foods and Ingredients, a global player, I would say, on the international pulses market. The head office is based in Canada. On this slide, we'll see some figures regarding the companies which are part of the group, amongst others. AGT does quite a bit of turnover. We are exporting as AGT to about 120 countries around the world, and we employ about 2,400 people in both processing facilities as well in offices. In 2019, Fairfax Holdings, a public company in Canada, took over the majority share of AGT, but that didn't really change much for us, other than that we had more capital to develop our new business lines. Looking at the facilities around the world, there's an overview here. I will not mention all of the countries and the places where we are, but you can see that we've got a pretty large coverage around the world, not in the last place, also in developing countries. We're in South Africa, we're in Australia, but also in India, in Myanmar, and different other places. You can see at the global map where we are. The advantage for AGT being located in many parts of the world is that we can easily switch from one crop or one origin to another. If there's a crop failure in North America, or if there is a calamity in Ethiopia, like which is going on with the civil war at the moment, and that would jeopardize our supplies to our customers, we're usually easy to switch to other origins, and I think that's a very beneficial thing for our customers. Just a little bit as regards to the products we're handling. This is a very brief overview. As we could see on the presentation of Michel, there are a lot of different beans available. Generally, AGT is handling all those different beans, different origins, different colors, sometimes the same beans from different origins. Apart from beans, what we do as group is other items like rice. We have in Turkey our own processing facility where we make different types of pasta and bulgur, and the pasta, for instance, is exported to, well, at least 90 countries around the world. On top of that, in the same line, we have bird seeds and those items which go hand in hand with the pulses. And rather new type of products which we have been investing in a lot in production facilities and in investigations on how to make those products in close coordination with the University of Minot in the USA, are pulses proteins. Already several years ago, AGT has started producing what we call pulses ingredients, and it doesn't really matter whether that's from beans, peas, or lentils, but if you mill them and you process them, you're able to separate the starch, the proteins, and the fibers. That's a new development. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Just to give you an idea, there's a whole transition going on. It's the protein transition, which is shifting people away from animal-based proteins to vegetable proteins. That is for several reasons. One of the reasons is it's more healthy, and another reason is that the production of animal proteins cannot be kept going with the speed the world population is growing, apart from the environmental friendly issues involved in that as well. I'll come back to that a little bit later too. As you can see here, this is one of the facilities where we are producing those different ingredients, and they're being used in meat, in pastas, even in snack food. So there's a very wide range of products where they can be used. Global AGT business, you can see that we do packed goods. We have lentils, peas, split peas, the pastas in the right top corner. On the left bottom corner, you see the veggie pasta, Veggie pasta is made by ourselves purely of yellow peas, which means it's totally gluten-free, and it is a very good alternative for the regular wheat pastas, which contain gluten and which cannot be consumed by everyone. On this picture, you see that apart from delivering our products to the end users, to the industry, which are canners, packers, companies who make ready meals or frozen meals, we also do part of packing and canning ourselves. We have a few facilities, amongst others, in Turkey, in Canada, and South Africa, where we are making ready consumer goods, which are going to the stores directly in our own brands. On this slide, I have a whole overview, which I invite you to read later on. I will not go into the details, but what Michel already mentioned about France is that pulses, beans in general, are very, very healthy item. I've worked myself for about 4 years in South Africa, and we had a huge sign on top of the building where we said basic foods for the people, and we were packing beans, we were packing rice. The situation these days has changed a lot. Nowadays, if you go to Europe or if you go to North America in the Western world, beans are not a poor man's food anymore. They are not a basic food for the people. They are a very hot item, which is considered to be very healthy. And what I say, you know, after many years of absence in that market, beans or pulses in general are a sexy item again. So yeah, that will definitely bring some additional possibilities for new developing markets to enter the market, as well, as we feel that the consumption of pulses will be growing. One of the other things for which there is a big drive in the pulses industry is that they are not only healthy, but they are very sustainable in production as well, especially in a crop rotation with cereal or with oil seeds. You see that the pulses plant replenishes the soil with nitrogen. Well, nitrogen fixing is a good thing, because the farmers who are planting the beans do need to use less fertilizer. Less fertilizer means less expenses, and obviously if we do not have to put stuff in the soil, it's also better for the environment. Very quick pick at the carbon footprint. I won't go into details, but you can see that lentils are all the way to the left in the green, and that beans are also close to that, compared to, for instance, beef and lamb production, which are way out in the red. So the carbon footprint on pulses production is much less. Also, if you compare it to other agricultural products like rice and potatoes, pulses do not have much impact on the production, on the soil, on the environment, which is something which is very important in the Western world these days. The next slide I want to share with you, because it's mind-boggling if you think about it, that in the next 40 years, we will need to produce as much food as what we've done in the last 10,000 years. Obviously, that has to do with the growth of the population. The population has been growing enormously over the years, but this also means that this growth of the production, people need to eat. We have to produce the food. That cannot be done by just, you know, growing more cattle or breeding more pigs. A big chunk of that production will have to come from pulses, being a good protein source. This also makes us believe, as AGT, that we are on the right track with our pulses business, because there's definitely a good future in it. I'm rushing a little bit through my slides because I do not want to spend too much time on the company or those details, because there's other things I want to talk about as well. Looking at this slide, very briefly, what the lines say is that we see a change to more healthy foods, not only here, but there's also a drive, for instance, in India, which has been happening there for many years already, where a lot of vegetarian people are eating more pulses than ever what you ever see in the world. We're steering away from meat. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a big drive going on that these animal proteins will be replaced by vegetable proteins, and pulses, peas, beans, and lentils are the main items to do that. This is a little bit of background on AGT and developments which are going on in the market. So if you want to export or you want to become an exporter to the EU market, what do you have to deal with? There are several things which you have to keep in mind. We saw, for instance, in Michel's presentation that Ethiopia is one of the countries which is a big supplier to Portugal. We are taking part of that as AGT. We are very much involved in Ethiopia. We've had our own representative office in Addis Ababa for more than 30 years already. We buy a lot in the Ethiopian market. Part of that is going to third countries, as we call it, but a very big chunk of that always has been coming to the European market, to the EU market. Honestly, that is becoming more and more complicated, and it is more difficult to do that. One of the reasons that is becoming more complicated is the requirements of the EU buyers, of the EU authorities. If you look at the importers or the users here in Europe, they are supplying their products to retailers, big retailers. They supply their products European-wide to the stores, so they have their stores European-wide. They are all very quality focused. So what an importer in Europe needs is a reliable supply chain. A reliable supply chain means that if you book a contract with a supplier anywhere in the world, you have to be certain that you will get your cargo, that you will get it at the agreed price, that you will get it in time, and that it will be of the quality which you agreed together. And that is very important, because if any one of those three is failing, if an exporter who wants to supply in Europe does not supply his product anymore because they were able to fetch a slightly higher price with another buyer because the market has moved up, that still means that the exporter has to supply. It works vice versa as well. If as AGT or as European buyer, I buy at price X and the market completely drops and it collapses, then still I will take the cargo which we bought at the agreed price. We will not say, well, look, the market is lower, so you have to give me a lower price, because that doesn't work like that. So there has to be a good interaction and good two-way traffic between the buyer and the seller. Shipments have to go on time, which is a challenge these days with the high freight rates and the lack of empty containers and vessel space, but it has to be managed. So contract, prices, and quality should be honored. I'll come back on quality on the next slide as well. Another development we see, which is important for the EU market, is the packaging, where we used to buy in 50-kilo bags in the past. We used to bring in the containers. We had a lot of labor available to discharge the containers, put the bags on pallets in the warehouses. That is not easy in Europe anymore. There is lack of labor, and the labor which is available is very expensive. So we saw a move from 50-kilo bags to 25-kilo bags, which was also initiated by labor laws and things like that. But nowadays, there's only a few people in the warehouses where we are receiving the cargo, which means that we would prefer to buy in 1 metric ton big bags, because one bag can be lifted out the container with a forklift. We only need one guy in the warehouse, and he discharges a container in 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So that's a difference with what you see in many developing countries in origins, where the containers are being stuffed with many people with a lot of labor, but that's not possible for the European market anymore. Then another thing which the suppliers have to keep in mind is that not all the varieties which are growing in their countries are suitable for the European market. Just to give you an idea, we buy quite a bit in East Africa. There's a variety called red speckled kidney beans. That's a red bean with a light speckle on it. Those beans we would not be able to use in the European market. Maybe for a niche market, 1 or 2 containers, but that's it. There are other varieties like dark red kidney beans, like navy beans, which are far more important. That's one part. And then apart from the varieties, well, I would add on that it would be good to focus, for instance, on niche markets as well. There are certain types of beans which might not be growing in your country as yet, but the soil and the growing conditions might be very suitable to grow certain niche market beans. And then the quantities won't be thousands of tons, but you would fetch a premium for a niche market product. That is something, if we have ideas or if you have ideas, you know, we can exchange those ideas and we can work on that together. Then another item is the cleaning of the beans. In the past, we were just bringing in beans and we had to re-clean all those beans in the Netherlands before we could supply them to the end users, to the industry. These days, with the lack of labor and with the very expensive handling and cleaning costs here in Europe, we prefer to buy fully cleaned product which can be used and packed straight away, which means that our suppliers in the countries, in the origins, you know, would need to have proper cleaning lines. And a proper cleaning line can be a whole range of machines, including Sortex, which we would see as the bare minimum. On top of that, with X-ray machines and things like that. We do understand that that might be a bit over the top, especially for developing countries. So machine cleaning in combination with hand picking, hand pick selection would still be suitable for our market as well. Although hand picking is being considered as not very hygienic for the European market. So step by step, we would need to move away from that. Just a little breakdown to add on the items which are coming in the EU. If you can see, or you can see that navy beans and dark red kidney beans together are accountable for approximately 60% of the total imports which are coming into the EU. You can focus on that because you know that the volumes will be there. As I said before, it might be of interest also to look at other smaller items, niche market items, which might grow and produce very well in your country. Volumes will be a bit smaller, but again, the premiums might be available. I'm coming back to the quality, just a little bit deeper into the quality. As I said before, we are using our beans for canning, packing, ready meals mostly. Product has to be sound, has to be healthy, and has to be merchantable, fit for human consumption. But what is fit for human consumption? That is more or less determined, or that is actually fully determined by the EU regulations, which we have in place here in Europe. EU regulations go about items such as chemical residue levels. So you're not allowed to have certain chemicals at all. Other chemical residue levels can be to a certain limit, but you have to be within those limits in order to have those products imported in the EU. If they are over the limit, we as importers are not allowed to import them. We cannot bring them into the country, and we have to send them back to the country of origin or to another destination where the regulations are less strict. We see over the years that these residue levels are getting stricter. And we're talking chemical residue levels, we're talking aflatoxin, ochratoxin. So it is important for a supplier from origin, any origin, to meet those regulations. And one of the items where I said earlier that Ethiopia is getting more difficulties in importing in the EU is the fact that a lot of the beans in Ethiopia do have excessive chemical residue levels. We are controlling that now by testing each and every shipment on chemical levels before we export it from the country of origin. But that's a very complicated and a very expensive method to do that. So as such, we would rather have a proper production where not many chemicals are being used, so that we can import it in the EU without any hassle or without having any rejections. Same applies to fumigation. All the cargoes we bring in are being fumigated. That has to be done with phostoxin. Methyl bromide is not used or is not allowed to be used in the EU. Phostoxin is. But also there are restrictions again, because if you put too much fumigant into the container and it arrives at the warehouse in Europe, you will see that the residue levels in the container are too high and that the warehouses will refuse to offload those containers. That's not something which is just thought of by the warehouse keepers, but it's also a regulation by the authorities that if there is a certain limit which is exceeded on residue gas in the container, you're not allowed to offload. That whole story on chemicals and fumigant is a bit contradictory to another requirement we have, because the product has to be free from alive and dead weevils. Well, alive weevils, you will kill them in the container if you put a fumigant. But we've seen lately that if the product is not treated, we find dead insects or dead weevils in the containers. In the containers is not so bad, you can clean it out. But if it's on the inside of the bean, it's a big problem again, because none of our end users, none of the industrial canners or packers will accept beans with weevils inside. So it's a balancing act. You need to use some chemicals to make sure that is under control, but you do not need to use too much, because that is another problem again. So it's a balancing act. Foreign matters, obviously, cleaning, we talked about further about machine cleaning, hand picking, hazardous foreign matters, such as glass, stone, sharp plastic, which is dangerous for humans to eat or to get into the system, is not acceptable. Generally, what we do when we buy, well, in all cases we've got a certain product specification, and that product specification is a clear stipulation of several pages on what the product should meet and what we can expect and what the exporter should be able to produce. So it's a bit complicated, and it's very difficult for me to explain in detail what those criteria are, because I don't have the time to do that in the 20 minutes which I have for this presentation. But I really would like to invite people or companies who are interested to work with us and to work with the European market, to contact us. That's why I've put all my details on the last slide as well. We can be contacted on those numbers and email address. If you are genuinely interested to export to the EU market, you like to have more information, or you would like to approach us to see if we can work together in one way or another, please feel free to contact us. Our door is open for new suppliers. So yeah, that would be it from my side. And I hope that I've been able to give you a little bit of a picture on what is happening on our side here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erik.
Here we go. Back to Tonia.
Yes. Thank you very much for sharing that information with us. And there was a lot of information actually that was shared in your presentation. For our audience, we're about to move into our first Q&A session, and we have a number of questions that have come in. So I'm going to start putting your questions to our speakers. But before we move into that, I'm actually curious about something, Erik. And then in the meantime, yes, Michel, thank you. I was going to invite you to join us on the screen. Erik, I'm wondering about something. Listening to your presentation, there's all this information about food safety, about requirements, about the challenges of getting products to Europe. Suppose I am a small scale producer and I'm interested in exporting to Europe. You're talking about X-ray machines. You're talking about huge investments. Does it even make sense for me to try, or should I focus my attention on a different continent?
No, not necessarily, because if you're a small producer, I don't think that, you know, the big importers like India and Pakistan are waiting for you, because they buy big quantities, big volumes. So what I think is important, and I do realize, I do understand as a small producer that you cannot put up a big investment to start with. You have to go somewhere. But if you look at most of the producing countries, and I'm talking about, for instance, East Africa, and we're also buying in Southeast Asia, the smaller producers there do not have their own production facilities. They have own production of beans. They have methods of collecting beans from the area where they live in. With those beans they collect, they go and do outsource cleaning, because in every country which you can imagine, there are cleaning facilities. They are available for rent. You can use that and you can do a proper cleaning and start your exports. Once that is done and you are growing in your exports, yeah, maybe later you can start building your own cleaning line. But I can imagine, you know, to put up a $100,000 or $125,000 for a start for a cleaning line, that is over the top for some people to start with. But in my view, that wouldn't be necessary.
Okay. That's good to hear, because that opens up opportunities for some of the smaller producers in the various countries. And that is a very good segue to two other things. Erik, you send out an invitation to our audience for anyone who is seriously interested in exporting to the EU to get in touch with you, which is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that that invitation.
My pleasure.
And I am curious to know, what kind of relationship do you establish with your suppliers? Is it mainly short-term? Is it long-term? What kind of support do you provide them in terms of meeting regulations, quality, food safety, for example?
Yeah, we do support our suppliers as much as we can from our side. After all, I mean, if they do a good job, it's only beneficial for ourselves. There's no use for me to keep them hanging, dangling somewhere and hope they can do something. Now, we would like to work with them and we would like to receive good quality. So we will guide them and we will support them to make that happen. Apart from that, you know, I can say, as you can see, such a process will take a lot of time. It will cost a lot of time. We are not interested to do that for a once-off deal. I mean, my time is also very precious, like everybody else's. We always try to work on long-term relationship. And the reason for that is that once you have got established your relationship and the supplier knows what quality is required and we know what we can expect from them, it's easy going forward. And then everybody knows to what is expected from them, which will help to grow the business in the future. And we don't want to spend a lot of time, like I said, for a once-off deal. If we're happy with the quality, we're satisfied with the service, yes, let's continue. We use beans all year round. We don't use beans only for a few weeks, but we need our beans throughout the year to keep our factories going and to supply to the consumers around Europe and other places as well, in fact.
Okay, and a quick follow-up, do you also help your suppliers with investments for getting started, for example?
It depends a little bit on the situation. It depends on the situation. It depends also on the country of origin. We've done some investments in the past, but well, I told you we are part of a large global company, and they've got a lot of money stuck in different projects around the world. So it's always a little bit difficult to do that. But I mean, there's other ways of support. You know, we can help the farmers, or no, not the farmers, but the producers with the methods on how they should control and things like that. So I'm not saying no, it's not possible at all, but it will depend very much on the origin and the type of situation we're facing in the country.
Yeah, it's not the very first question that a supplier should be asking you.
They can ask, but they will not automatically get a yes, we will reply on that. No.
Okay, thank you for that. Michel, over to you. Shailendra is asking, in terms of fertilization, beans require fertilization to be produced, and Shalindra is very interested to know that what requirements are there in terms of exporting to the EU market for organic export, and the fact that you need fertilizers to grow beans.
Yeah, but I believe for organic production, you can use only organic fertilizers. So that can be tricky, of course. I think organic, I will get into it a little bit more later, but it is something to consider if you're really convinced that you're able to do so. Because it's not an easy market to tap into. Regulation is quite strict. The default MRL levels, the maximum residue levels, are 0.01 milligrams per kilo. So there shouldn't be any residues, basically. So it's really something to inform yourself well in before getting into. And if it's not possible in your region, a tropical country, it is much more complicated. Just I would advise to do a couple of trials first before really turning into full organic. But it is an interesting market, and it is a premium market.
Yeah,
so,
and I believe
yeah.
that there's some information in your market study as well about organic requirements and where to find additional information, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Maybe Erik wants to add.
Yeah, maybe if I can tap into that, because as you rightly say, Michel, it's a niche market, it's an added value market. The limitations on what you are allowed to have on chemical residues are actually zero. There are a few exceptions. They say, okay, if the neighbor has been spraying and some of the spray has landed on your field, but those are not 0.01, they're even less, if you ask me. I don't have the exact figures. But it's not only that, it's also very important that in order to be able to supply it as organic, you will need to have organic certification. And organic certification is something which an independent organization will give the farmer, but that starts at planting, and then the field is not allowed to be used I think 3 years before you start planting organic. There's no chemicals allowed to be used in those 3 years. Then you can start planting your organic. And then it's monitored from day one when you put the seed in the soil until the moment that it's been harvested. And then that official organization will give you an organic certificate with it. But that's a very complicated process. And I know several of the developing countries where we are doing business with, they have product which is organic by default because they didn't use any fertilizers, but that does not make it officially organic certified for the receivers in Europe. So that's something they have to keep in mind.
That's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
That's definitely a challenge. So Shalindra, I think the best advice is make sure that you inform yourself before making a decision about organic production, yes or no. We have a number of questions that are coming in terms of with regards to market access and market entry requirements. And I would like to ask our audience to be patient just a little longer, because Michel is going to follow up with a second presentation that gives information about market entry and market access. And I think, seeing the questions that are coming in at this moment, that it's probably best to keep this Q&A short right now, go over to Michel's presentation, and then come back to a longer Q&A session and pick up the questions that have not yet been answered in the presentation. Erik and Michel, thank you for participating in this Q&A. We'll see you in the second Q&A, and we will now go over to Michel for the second presentation about market access and market entry.
Okay.
Michel, I am transferring presenting rights to you.
All right. You should be able to
see your screen and we see your
Correct.
camera. I am
Great.
going offline. All over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, going to the next part. Market requirements, just to sum up a few things quickly, would be bad to do before going to market entry. Yeah, so Erik talked about it as well. Of course, the most important thing in basically all food trading, but also kidney beans, is food safety. So products need to be clean, they need to be residue free, they need to be pest free, and they need to be traceable. So the European Union, I wanted to tell you as well, they have a pesticide database where you can actually look up the maximum allowed residue limits for kidney beans and different chemical substances. So that's the legal aspect. That does not mean that some buyers may, especially retailers, they may ask for even stricter limits, but these are the legal limits that you should be respecting. So buyers will usually ask you for some type of certification to guarantee your good practices. I would advise in agriculture global gap. And for pest management, you can also consider integrated pest management. So instead of using chemicals, you try to use alternative systems to fight pests in your crop. For cleaning, storing, processing of beans, it is quite crucial to have a certified food safety management system, usually based on HACCP. And there are typical certifications that people usually have. It can be ISO 22000, it can be IFS, it can be BRC. But these type of certifications, they will give buyers a better guarantee that you comply with the common food standards, food safety standards. So another thing also already mentioned by Erik is sustainability, but this applies both for governments and companies these days. So you have the new European Green Deal and the farm to fork strategy. They will require a more sustainable supply chain, reducing the environmental impacts of primary production in Europe, but also abroad. So if you think about going organic, for example, the fastest way is cutting down a forest because it's virgin land, but I would not recommend that to do that at all, because then you will have conflict with the sustainability strategy in Europe. And also an increasing number of companies are implementing social and environmental policies. Just to give an example, that one of the biggest canning companies, Bonduelle, a big brand, they monitor the performance of corporate social responsibility in the supply chain, and they use an EcoVadis platform to do that. But you can expect many buyers to have a code of conduct or some kind of policy that you will have to adopt as well as a supplier. Well, going into organic, organic, of course, also fulfills the sustainability goals that we have, and it has definitely the advantage that it is a label that is recognizable also for consumers. So yeah, it's definitely a niche, and even an interesting niche market. So yeah, it's a way to differentiate yourself, but it's not an easy thing to implement, like I said, especially in more tropical areas. So at the moment, much of the current organic supply actually comes from Europe itself, from European farmers. And of course, here we have quite a different climate as well, so it may be a bit easier. So if you want to certify your kidney beans as organic, I would say prepare for a different mindset, and also check if it's feasible in your situation. Another thing I wanted to add to that is that in January, the new updated regulation will also come into force. So be sure to read those. You can read the links in our studies. Going to market access. When you comply with all the basic expectations and all the food regulations, you can look at positioning your company on the European market. So the different segments, I would divide these segments between a more traditional consumption and a more modern, maybe even health-based consumption. The traditional consumption forms the main segment still, with canned beans, dry beans, typical local varieties. But some of the growth can be anticipated in the higher segments and development of actually healthy food products. For example, using beans as a vegan ingredient for pastas or meat substitutes, also as a protein food. So how can you address these segments? Basically, as a supplier, you can well, yeah, you have to focus on the required quality and product characteristics, of course. They can be different for dry packed beans and canned beans. But you also have to find the right partner for the different segments. Channels. I think finding the right partner means that you need to have at least some basic understanding of the supply chain. The supply chain for kidney beans is usually quite integrated, and it will probably become more integrated as well. But importers, traders, brokers, those are likely your primary contacts to get into the market. Behind these companies, you can find several key companies that pack, process, or use kidney beans as an ingredient for the consumer market. Importers and traders, they can be the right channel for you if you're starting to export to Europe. Importers typically have a role as supply chain managers. So they find sources for their products and they control all aspects of quality and compliance before it moves up to in the supply chain. They also help establish a reliable supply for the clients. This has actually become quite a challenge during COVID, the pandemic. But yeah, these are the companies that are managing this well. You will find importers of different sizes. The larger importers, of course, AGT Foods, Erik, they are part of a much bigger company, a well-integrated company, also with agricultural production. But you also see a lot of smaller independent traders. And these might also be equipped to deal with small and medium suppliers. But in today's trade and supply chain integration, you know, for these independent companies, it's not always easy to stay alive. I think successful importers usually have specializations and specific client groups, so these can definitely be relevant for you as a supplier. Also for niche varieties, or for example, of course, organic kidney beans as well. Then you have brokers. Brokers basically have similar activities as an importer, but they are mostly a facilitator, and they do not actually become an owner of the product. So they work for a commission as an intermediary between buyers and sellers. But they can definitely be helpful if you have little knowledge of the market. You can use their experience if you don't have your own network. So this is a way to reach the same important market channels and clients, and especially those clients that want to keep a low profile and work through a broker and not that much directly. Well, in the end, there are well, most kidney beans, they end up with packers, processors. There are many of them. So you have private label packers, canning companies such as Caro's in the Netherlands and Asico in Spain. There are a wide variety of brands that pack dry beans, such as the Italian Pedon or Sabarot in France. And you have convenience brands, canning companies like Bonduelle, Ladoria. And behind that, you have also companies such as Unidex, which focuses a bit more on the ethnic food and ethnic food brands, and specialized brands in organic like La Bio Idea, which is an organic food brand. And all these companies, they will require continuity and consistency. So consistent quality to support their brands. And therefore, they often prefer working with steady sources with the same bean variety So sometimes larger suppliers are able to guarantee a certain volume and a certain quality, and they can become more involved with these companies. Well, in the end, to sum up a little bit what we've talked about, I think you have to do everything to make yourself an attractive supplier. I think experience will definitely count. So before aiming for the European market, just make sure to be successful first on your local market, on the regional market, and then make the step to the European market. Check if you have the varieties that buyers in Europe are actually interested in. Like Erik said, contact companies and check and see what they think about the variety that you're producing. Characteristics such as taste, size, behavior when being cooked, for example, or when being canned. These are important. But also verify if your documentation and certification is complete. And I think to become really successful on the European market, you will have to think long-term. Reliability is an important trait, not only respecting the legal standards, but also respecting agreements you have with European buyers. And I think buyers here will only commit to a supplier if they can guarantee a certain quality, maybe a certain volume for specific buyers. You can increase their confidence by adding excellent bean cleaning and grading facilities. Of course, like Erik said, it can be your own, but it can also be a third party that you're using. But it's crucial to get into the right quality. And last but not least, diversification. I think in both products and markets, that's probably a good strategy to spread your risk as a supplier. So that's the last thing I would add to the conversation. So that's for my part. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer additional questions. And back to you, Tonia.
Thank you, Michel. And I am switching to our Q&A session. Please stay on the screen, Michel, and I'm going to invite Erik. There you are. Welcome back to join us for the second Q&A session. We have a number of questions that have been answered during your presentation, Michel, and there are a couple of things I just want to point out. So we have a question. We had a question that disappeared about certifications, and Martin, I'd like to thank you for giving some additional information in the chat, where you say that in terms of in terms of food safety, it depends on where in the supply chain you are. So that pulses farmers with basic processing like cleaning and storage will need HACCP certification. Processors need a GFSI accredited food safety system, which is, for example, BRC, IFS, or FSSC 22000, not ISO 22000. Martin, thank you for sharing that additional information with us. In terms of, Michel, this is probably a good question for you. What are average prices for beans? And do we see a price distinction between conventional beans and organic beans on the market? I think the answer is yes to that second question.
Yes, the answer is yes, but maybe actually that's even a better question for Erik, because he deals with beans on a daily basis and with pricing. The only thing I can say is that at least in 2020 prices were a bit higher, but of course it has also to do with higher costs, higher demand. Yeah, but prices, I guess they're a bit more stable than a lot of other more volatile food products, but I think Erik is much better equipped to sell something about the pricing.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy, that it was pretty stable. It very much depends on certain factors. To start with, the production figures. If you look, for instance, at this point in time, where both US and Canada have suffered, well, I would say near crop failures. They have had very bad crops. quantity-wise and quality-wise, that has been boosting prices. So prices today are pretty high compared to last year and the years before. That never gives a guarantee that prices will remain at those higher levels. It all depends on other factors as well. You can think of trade wars, for instance. US beans, if you have to deliver them to the EU market today, you will have to pay 25% import duty on US beans because of the trade war, which was caused by Mr. Trump. Luckily for us, as per the 1st of January, Mr. Joe Biden has said, look, we'll have to find a solution, and the 25% import duty will be skipped. So if you have all that type of issues, currencies, if you have currencies going through the roof or currencies making a deep fall, that will all influence the prices, which at the end of the day we will get in dollars or in euros. But the main driver for the price differences is the availability. I mean, it's all availability and
the market.
And that can change quite a bit from year to year.
Depending on the harvest, for example.
Depending on the harvest, but also depending on the planting. If a lot of farmers decide, well, look, you know, I mean, these pea beans or these navy beans, we're not really keen to plant them because we didn't like last year's prices, they might plant something else. They might plant dark reds or pinto beans, for instance. But it's not only that, it's not only what's happening in the pulses business, it also happens what are the with prices and availability of alternatives. If corn and wheat prices are very high, you will see a lot of farmers shift away from beans to those items. For one reason, that it brings more money, but the second reason is planting beans is difficult. You have to attend to the field, you have to use a lot of fertilizer and other things to grow a proper bean. And if you see corn and wheat, yeah, that's easy. You just put it in the soil, and at the end of the day, when the product is ready, you harvest it. And if that brings good money, if those prices are high, you will easily see a shift from edible beans.
From beans to wheat, for example.
To wheat, to corn, to soybeans, for instance, yeah.
And Erik, in line with that, planting beans is difficult. Are there any particular varieties that you, AGT Foods, are interested in?
Like I said before, we generally use all types of beans. But if you look at the European market, where I think the focus should be on, it's okay. They go under different names. I mean, I think Michel called them Berlotti beans from Italy. But that same type of bean you can buy as light speckled kidney bean from China or from East Africa. You can buy it as cranberry bean from the US and Canada. That type of beans, for instance, is interesting for our market. Same applies to dark red kidney beans and the right variety dark red kidney beans, because there are several countries producing a dark red kidney bean. But if you put that into water or you cook it, it turns white. That is not what the European consumer wants. If he buys dark red kidney beans, he wants to have a red bean on his plate.
The red bean, so
the type which you have to produce then is that type. And it's easier said than done, because if I say I want a red cooking bean and I want to have it from Tanzania or from Ethiopia or Kenya or whatever, it does not automatically mean that they have the right growing conditions to
be able to produce that bean. Yeah.
And or maybe the temperatures are too high and you get too many cracked seed coats, which means you cannot use it for the canning industry. So there's it's not as easy as it sounds, but it takes, you know, effort and it takes investigation. And we do those trials in certain countries every now and again to see if we can grow those products. You know, we'll put it in the soil. It's a long process. It can take several years, but that's what we try to do to open up these niche markets.
Okay.
For ourselves and the producers.
Following up on that where you run trials, for example, there's an interesting question here where it says that it seems that the consistency of red kidney beans is an issue and they easily vary in color. They're not red enough, for example, or they turn white, as you just gave in your example. What is the normal deviation in color, and can anything be done about that? The fact that they aren't red enough.
Yeah, that answer is rather simple. You have to plant the right variety.
Okay.
If you use the right variety, it will keep the red color. If you use another variety, and we call it will bleed, it will lose the color. The water turns red and the bean loses the color. So that's only type related. I mean, if you have a proper seed, which is a seed of the variety that keeps the color, You can put that in the soil anywhere in the world, and I won't say it will grow perfectly everywhere, but whatever bean you harvest, it will keep the red color.
Okay, thank you for that.
That is something which is important to keep in mind, that the proper varieties are being used for planting.
Okay. Coming back to a question about organic certification and organically produced beans. For producers that have only a global GAP certification that don't have an organic certification, or although they are organically producing, is this acceptable and can it fetch premium prices? No. Sorry, George,
No.
not acceptable.
Simple.
Doesn't work that way.
No certification is not organic.
No certification, not organic. Clear.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have a question here from Benjamin, and this question is directed at Erik. Erik, are you selective about the countries that you deal with? Do you have minimum quantities that you expect from a supplier?
We were talking about long-term relationship and things like that earlier. So if we talk to a supplier who has one container and we have to see it as a once-off deal, yes, we can look at it, but it's not our preference. We would rather see continuity of supply. So we know what product we get, we know what we can use it for, and we know that we can utilize it throughout the year. That's not always possible, but you know, to buy one container here and then sit back for another year and buy another container is not really what we aim for, to be honest.
Long-term relationships and minimum quantities.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it has to be like 200 tons every month or something like that, but there has to be a bit of continuity or a bigger quantity which we can bring in so that we can use that for a longer period of time in our production.
Benjamin, I think the best step for you is to reach out to AGT Foods via the email address that Erik supplied and continue the discussion with Erik yourself. Michel, you mentioned promoters and brokers. How do you interest them for farmers and for products? Where do you find them?
Sorry, promoters?
Promoters, brokers. I'm a smallholder farmer. I want to export beans to Europe and I'm interested in finding a promoter and or a broker. How do I go about it?
Right. Yeah. So finding the right contacts. You mean? Well, normally, of course, we have a lot of events and trade fairs, food-related trade fairs, and I think those are ideal to get into contact with companies. Of course, that is a little bit more difficult now during COVID, and we are entering new lockdowns. So it's not sure if all trade fairs will actually happen on the short term. But I think those events are definitely the best way to get into touch with potential buyers, may it be brokers or maybe importers. And those events you can actually also show your product. So live meetings
events? Because we don't have the trade fairs right now. How about the virtual events?
As far as I know, I think there are a lot of buyers, they are hesitant about virtual events. They rather have live meetings. They rather go to a trade fair. So that's the preferred method. I won't say it wouldn't work, but there will definitely be less interest, in my opinion. But well, maybe Erik wants to respond to that. I'm not sure if you participate in virtual buying events.
Yeah, we do. I mean, lacking the real alternative, I would say. It's not ideal, but it helps a bit. For instance, what we did last year, or this year, I should say earlier this year with Gulf Food in Dubai, which is a large, if not the largest, trade fair on food items in Dubai. We had our stand where we usually are with, I don't know, 10, 15 people of our organization to receive customers, to receive suppliers, and to show what AGT is all about. We had our booth, and instead of the people there, we had like 7 or 8 laptops on tables, 1 or 2 hostesses from Dubai, and when people came to visit, because there were people who came to visit, they were put behind the laptop and we could talk to them, well, face to face like we are doing now. It's not a real thing, but there are alternatives like that. Same as with GPC. GPC is the Global Pulses Confederation. We are a member of GPC, and they have like an annual conference, which usually is in a pulses growing area. It can be from Brazil to South Africa to China. It's been in many countries, and also the last 2 occasions already, it has been an online event where you still can meet up with people. There's presentations like we've done today. There's discussions. There's panels. But yeah, it's different from meeting people face to face. But if there is an alternative,
yeah. So as long as we're dealing with restrictions and COVID imposed reduced travel, I think the best way is to do some research online. And Michel's study has some information about where to find buyers as well, and where to do some additional research. And until we can get back to the trade fairs, virtual meetings might be the way to go. Given the time, I'm taking one more question before we move to closing down the webinar. And there's a question here that says, countries like India face more and more competition for their exports from European producers who can also grow many different pulses. Do kidney beans, red kidney beans, grow in Europe? And what could Indian exporters do to promote their sales in terms of their unique selling proposition? Erik.
For me, I was afraid you were going to ask that. Europe being competition for India as exporter, I don't see. That is definitely not the case. As we've seen in Michel's presentation as well, consumption in Europe of pulses is reasonable, is fair. It's not very big, but production is even worse. There is production of some dark red kidney beans. I think if you look at Poland, for instance, they produce 1,000 tons per annum, and they consume a lot more than that. If you look at France, they have started producing some dark red kidney beans, but it's all small scale. If you have the big producers on dark red kidney beans, you're talking USA, you're talking Canada. Those are the major growing areas. We see some competition for them coming from former Soviet states like Ukraine, like Kazakhstan and those places, but it's all still very small scale. That India was exporting dark red kidney beans, I didn't even know. I thought they were a net importer as well, and I didn't know they were producing, but okay, I'm still learning apparently even after more than 30 years.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I like to be in this business. I mean, you never stop learning. But no, I do not see on those items Europe being any competition for India if they are producing. There's a lot of demand around the world where their beans would be going. And I think also if quality can be met for the EU market, Europe would really like to buy from them.
So in short, quality, consistency in supply, and minimum supply levels. Michel, do you have anything to add?
Maybe price can be an issue as well here, I think.
Price.
Yeah, absolutely. If I may hook into that, it's a very good point actually, Michel, which I didn't really touch. If we look at our main supply sources like US, Canada, let's say the well-known origins where you have no hassle, you just buy your product, you get it delivered, and that's it. And if you want to counter that market with, let's say, new origins, alternative origins, yeah, they will always have to be cheaper. It's a more complicated route. It's always more difficult with new origins. And in many cases, with all due respect, but the qualities are not as good, especially in the beginning. So for those reasons, to get your foot in the door and to be able to enter those markets, there will have to be something which triggers the buyers to go for that origin, and that most of the times in Pulse's business is price indeed. Yeah.
Okay, so your unique selling proposition, distinguishing features are actually going to come later in the process, and if you're trying to break into the market, it's basically going to be price. Gentlemen.
Yeah, not only. I mean, quality is, I think, number one, and price is still number two.
Is number two. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for that addition, Erik. Gentlemen, Michel and Erik, thank you very much for joining us in this webinar today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And for our audience, we are going to be sharing the recording again of this webinar. We're going to be sharing the link to the market study, and we are going to be sharing the presentations as well. So you can review all the information that we shared with you at your leisure. Gentlemen, thank you. And at this time, I would like to invite Sanne to come back on the screen, join us from CBI, as she explains to us where exactly do we find this market information that CBI has available in all these different sectors.
Yes, thank you very much, Tonia and Erik and Michel, for all this information. And if, like I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, CBI is providing a lot of market information. So if you want to read more about this sector, about the product kidney beans, we have a lot of research information available, and I'm going to share my screen and show you where you can find it on our website. So let me see. I think I'm now sharing the screen. Yes, the right screen. Yes, so this is our website, CBI's website, and then the market information part. And there we have one page with all the research collected for grains, pulses, and oil seeds, to which this sector belongs to. I mean, the product we have been talking about today. So what we have is on a sector level information about what is the demand for these products in Europe, what are trends that offer opportunities on the European market, what are the requirements that your product should comply with. So this information is all on a sector level, more general. Also a study from last year, how to respond to COVID-19 in this sector, and one very important study, which is quite new yet, is about the EU Green Deal and how will it impact your business. So extra requirements that are foreseen. We also have tips studies, so tips how to find buyers, tips to do business, tips to go digital, so about digitalization of the supply chain and your export, and how to organize your export. And those are all on sector level. And then if we look down a little bit, we have all the different kind of product studies. So the study we have been talking about today is you can find on the dried beans. So this is, if I click on here, exporting kidney beans and other common dry beans to Europe. There we have two studies available, one about the market potential and one about the market entry. In this webinar today, we have been sharing the latest data. And so the new studies will be available here from coming January. So you can see here, these are still a bit old already, but in January there will be the new data, but that was also presented in this webinar. One more tip, if you want to stay informed about our latest publications, you can subscribe to our newsletter here. And so you will get a newsletter every month saying which new publications we have been made in this sector. You can choose which sectors you want to subscribe to. I think that was it. Thank you very much. And back to you, Tonia, for more information about our upcoming webinars.
Thank you very much, Sanne. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We have extended this webinar by almost 10 minutes, and we are now in the final 1 or 2 minutes before we close it down. For those of you that are exporting to Europe, other products to Europe, or for those of you that might be interested in exporting other products to Europe, in addition to kidney beans or in addition to any other products that you're already exporting, there are a number of upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you. So please do take a look at the CBI website, and if you see any that are interesting to you, make sure to sign up, and we'll see you there next time. Before we close this webinar, I'd just like to say thank you again for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you, and we hope that this webinar has shared some very useful and interesting information with you that you will be able to use to determine whether exporting kidney beans to Europe is something that you should now jump into. Before we close this webinar, you are going to receive a quick survey, or as we close this webinar, you're going to receive a quick survey where we are going to ask you for feedback. How did you experience the webinar? If you think it was terrible, give us a 1. If you think it was fantastic, give us a 10. And if you give us a number anywhere in between 1 and 10, we're going to be very happy with you. Again, I would like to thank you for being here. I'd like to thank CBI, the team behind the screens, for the technical support and backup and answering the questions. And I would like to thank our experts for sharing their information and knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and maybe see you next time. Goodbye.